Meissan Between Science and the Invisible, A Journey Through the Mysteries of Consciousness. Chapter 1. The Awakening of Doubt. In the quiet of his laboratory at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, Jacobo Grinberg gazed at the monitors displaying patterns of brainwaves. The year was 1987, and the air carried the weight of decades of scientific paradigms he was about to challenge. The electroencephalography machines hummed softly, creating a technological symphony that echoed through the empty halls of the neuroscience department. The flickering fluorescent light cast irregular shadows over the dozens of graphs scattered across his desk, results from his latest experiments on neural synchrony. On one of the sheets, a particular pattern caught his attention. During deep meditation, the subjects of his research exhibited inexplicably synchronized brainwaves, even when physically separated by shielded walls. The path that led Jacobo to this moment had begun long before in the bustling streets of Mexico City, where the scent of copal mingled with the distant sound of ancestral drums. Born into an intellectual middle-class family, he had been raised to question, to seek evidence, to never accept an answer without thorough examination. His training in psychology at UNAM had been only the beginning of a journey that would take him far beyond the boundaries of conventional science. As a respected neurophysiologist, he had dedicated his life to the study of the human brain, but something deeply unsettled him. The traditional models of consciousness seemed incomplete, like a symphony played halfway through. During his long nights of research, he often found himself pondering the limitations of accepted theories about the mind and consciousness. Dr. Grinberg. The voice of Maria, his most dedicated research assistant, brought him back to the present. The results from the neural coherence experiment have arrived from the processing lab. Maria was a brilliant young researcher with lively, curious eyes that reminded Jacobo of his own youth. She placed a thick folder on his desk, filled with graphs and tables documenting their latest experiment, a study on the potential transmission of mental states between spatially separated individuals. "Look at this," she pointed to a particular graph, her eyes gleaming with restrained excitement. The theta wave patterns of the participants began to synchronize after 20 minutes of meditation, even though they were in separate rooms. Jacobo adjusted his glasses, scrutinizing the data with meticulous care. The experiment had been designed with the utmost scientific rigor: 2 rooms separated by 50 meters, complete electromagnetic shielding, constant monitoring of environmental variables. Yet there the data was, showing an inexplicable correlation between the brain activities of the participants. "This reminds me of that case at Stanford," Jacobo murmured, pulling an old article from his drawer. In 1973, they documented similar synchronization among experienced meditators, but the study was shelved for being deemed inconclusive. That afternoon, as he reviewed his latest data, a particular memory struck him. His first visit to the Sonora market, known for its healers and shamans. It had been during his first year of doctoral studies when a colleague convinced him to join in an unofficial field research. The market was a labyrinth of colors and scents, where vendors offered everything from medicinal herbs to mystical talismans. It was there that he first heard of the Naguals, spiritual masters who supposedly could alter the very fabric of reality through the manipulation of consciousness. At the time, he had dismissed those stories as mere superstition. But now, 15 years later, with piles of inexplicable data on his desk, those memories returned with new significance. The scientific community knew him for his studies on altered states of consciousness and neural communication, but few were aware that Jacobo had begun to develop a revolutionary theory. For years, he had been gathering evidence suggesting that consciousness was not merely a product of the brain, but something far more fundamental. In his personal notebook, away from the eyes of skeptical colleagues, he sketched complex diagrams attempting to map what he called the neuronal matrix of reality. The theory began to take shape following a particularly intriguing experiment involving identical twins, where changes in one twin's mental state seemed to instantly affect the other, even when separated by vast distances. The university hallways, once so familiar, started to feel like gateways to uncharted territory. During his lectures, Jacobo noticed a subtle shift in how he presented traditional neuroscience concepts. His once strictly technical talks now included philosophical questions that left his students shifting uneasily in their seats. "But Professor," a senior student asked one day after a particularly provocative lecture on quantum consciousness, "if the brain isn't the source of consciousness, how do we explain the correlation between brain damage and changes in consciousness?" The question hung in the auditorium air like copal smoke. Jacobo smiled, recognizing in that doubt his own restless inquiries from years past. "Think of a radio," he replied. "If you damage different parts of the device, the music will be affected or might even stop altogether. But does that mean the radio creates the music?" It was in this state of mind that Jacobo first heard of Pachita. The rumors about the healer reached him through a colleague in the anthropology department, Dr. Manuel Hernandez, who studied traditional Mexican healing practices. "You need to see it with your own eyes, Jacobo," Manuel insisted during lunch at the university cafe. "She performs complex surgeries using nothing but a rusty kitchen knife, no anesthesia, no sterilization, and the patients feel no pain. Even more astonishing, they heal themselves." Manuel slid a brown envelope across the table, containing photographs of some of Pachita's surgeries. The images, though shocking at first glance, captured Jacobo's scientific curiosity. In one of them, Pachita appeared to be removing what looked like a brain tumor through a minimal incision, her hands moving with impossible precision in the confined space. "And there's more," Manuel continued, lowering his voice. "She claims to be guided by the spirit of Cuauhtémoc, the last Aztec emperor. During the surgeries, her voice changes, her posture transforms. It's as if she becomes an entirely different person." In his personal notes from that time discovered years later, Jacobo wrote, "Science is not just about confirming what we already know, but about having the courage to explore what we do not understand." Perhaps the ancient Mexican shamans understood something about consciousness that our modern technology has yet to detect. What we observe in our laboratories may only be the surface of a much deeper phenomenon. The next day, as he was organizing data from his latest experiment on neural synchronicity, Jacobo received an unexpected phone call. It was Pachita herself, or someone speaking on her behalf. "Dr. Grinberg," said the woman's voice on the other end of the line, "we know you are seeking answers. Come see us at the next full moon. Bring your scientific instruments if you wish, but come primarily with an open heart." The invitation, so direct yet enigmatic, stirred in Jacobo a blend of scientific excitement and unease. How did she know he was interested? Why specify the full moon? And why mention scientific instruments? That evening, in his apartment in the Coyoacán neighborhood, Jacobo meticulously prepared his portable EEG equipment, some electromagnetic field sensors, and a small video camera. As he worked, his mind wandered through the possibilities that lay ahead. If there was something genuine in Pachita's abilities, something that could be documented and studied scientifically, it could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness and reality itself. Chapter 2. The Encounter with the Impossible. The neighborhood where Pachita saw her patients was a labyrinth of narrow alleys and ancient houses, where modern Mexico and its ancestral roots merged in an age-old dance. Jacobo parked his Volkswagen, loaded with scientific equipment, in front of a modest house with peeling walls painted in a faded colonial blue. The sun was setting over Mexico City, casting the sky in hues of orange and purple that seemed to foreshadow something extraordinary. Before stepping out of the car, he double-checked his instruments. The portable electroencephalograph calibrated that morning, state-of-the-art electromagnetic field sensors, a high-speed video camera capable of capturing 240 frames per second, and a set of thermal sensors he had borrowed from the physics department. In his pocket, a small digital recorder completed his scientific arsenal. "Science is a method, not a dogma," he murmured to himself, repeating a phrase he often used in his lectures. It was his personal mantra when venturing beyond the boundaries of established knowledge. The interior of the house was a study in contrasts. Flickering candles cast dancing shadows on time-worn walls, creating an atmosphere where the shadows themselves seemed alive. The air was thick with the scent of medicinal herbs and copal, an aroma that instantly transported the mind to ancient times. For Jacobo, every detail was simultaneously a challenge to his scientific skepticism and an invitation to explore beyond the boundaries of the known. In the waiting room, 3 people sat in silence. A young woman with her arm in an elaborate sling, an elderly man visibly struggling to breathe, and a mother cradling a sleeping child in her lap. Their eyes followed Jacobo and his equipment with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "They've come from far away," a soft voice said behind him. It was a young woman who introduced herself as Elena, Pachita's assistant. "Some travel for days to get here. The woman with the child came all the way from Chiapas." As Elena helped Jacobo set up his equipment in a corner of the main room, she shared more details about Pachita's routine. She only performs surgeries on specific nights, usually during the full moon, and she doesn't take every case. She says she has to hear the call first. The distant sound of drums began to seep through the walls of the house, though Jacobo couldn't pinpoint their source. Elena explained that there was a traditional ceremonial center a few blocks away, where healers conducted nightly rituals of spiritual cleansing. Pachita greeted him with a gaze that seemed to pierce through his academic defenses. Short and sturdy, with graying hair tied into a long braid, she exuded a presence that transcended her physical appearance. Her hands, marked by time and labor, moved with a grace that contrasted with her apparent simplicity. "You've come seeking answers," she said, not as a question but as a statement. "But the true questions have yet to awaken in your mind." Jacob began to explain his scientific interest, mentioning his studies on consciousness and the equipment he had brought. But Pachita gently interrupted him with a wave of her hand. "Your devices won't capture what's essential," she said, an enigmatic smile playing on her lips. "But use them. The path of science is your path, and it is through it that you must arrive at the truth." She asked him to set up his equipment, and, as he worked, she began to speak of Cuauhtémoc, the spirit who guided her. He was a warrior priest, a guardian of knowledge that predates the arrival of the Spaniards. Knowledge about the nature of reality, about how the mind can shape the material world. The first case of the night was a young woman with an injured arm. Elena explained that she had been in a motorcycle accident 3 months prior, and conventional doctors had suggested amputation due to the severity of the nerve and tissue damage. As the patient lay down on the simple table covered with white sheets, Jacob strategically positioned his sensors around the room. The electroencephalograph would record not only Pachita's brain activity, but also the patient's. The electromagnetic field sensors were arranged in a triangular pattern, following strict research protocols. "Turn on your devices now," Pachita instructed, her voice already beginning to shift in tone. "What you are about to witness will challenge everything your teachers have ever taught you." The transformation was subtle at first. Pachita's posture changed, becoming more upright, more commanding. Her eyes, once warm and inviting, now bore a penetrating intensity that sent an involuntary shiver down Jacobo's spine. When she spoke, again her voice was deeper, carrying an accent reminiscent of ancient Nahuatl. "I am Cuauhtémoc," the voice declared through Pachita. "This body is my vessel to bring healing to those who seek with sincere faith." From a small side table, Elena brought forth a basin of water and a knife that looked as though it had come from an ordinary kitchen. Jacobo noticed that his electromagnetic field meter began to register anomalous fluctuations. The digital display showed variations that would typically only be expected near high-powered magnetic resonance equipment. "Professor," the voice of Cuauhtémoc Pachita called to him, "observe closely. What your eyes will see, your mind will try to deny. What your instruments record, your science will struggle to explain. But the truth lies beyond both." With a fluid motion, Pachita raised the knife. There was no sterilization, no conventional surgical preparation. The oxidized blade descended upon the patient's arm, and to Jacobo's astonishment, it passed through the skin without resistance. There was no blood. The tissues seemed to part like water before a boat. Thermal sensors recorded a sudden drop in temperature at the incision site. The electroencephalograph displayed synchronized patterns between Pachita and the patient, something Jacobo had only seen before in his studies with seasoned meditators. "Look here." Pachita Cuauhtémoc pointed inside the incision. "The nerves have been severed, but they are not dead. They simply need to remember their original path." Jacobo watched in awe as Pachita's hands moved with supernatural precision within the open arm. Her fingers seemed to emit a faint glow, visible only in his peripheral vision. The instruments registered spikes in electromagnetic activity that followed the motion of her hands. "The body knows how to heal itself," the ancient voice continued. "We merely remove the obstacles and awaken the cellular memory." For 43 minutes, meticulously recorded by the high-speed camera, Pachita worked inside the patient's arm. Jacobo witnessed tissues regenerating at an impossible speed, blood vessels reconnecting spontaneously, and nerves coming back to life under the touch of those ancient hands. In his field notebook later that night, he would write, "The instruments recorded phenomena that defy the known laws of physics and biology. Electromagnetic field variations 300% above normal. Brainwave patterns suggesting a completely unknown state of consciousness. Accelerated tissue regeneration that violates everything we know about healing. But the most extraordinary thing was not what the devices recorded, it was what they failed to capture. When the final suture closed, seemingly of its own accord, the patient moved the fingers of her affected arm for the first time in months. Silent tears streamed down her face, not from pain, but from a profound emotion that words could not express. Pachita, still embodying Cuauhtémoc, turned to Jacobo. "Your devices recorded much, but not everything. What you witnessed today is merely the surface of something far deeper." After the procedure, when the last patients had departed and Elena was organizing the traditional healing instruments, Jacobo remained seated in a corner of the room, absorbed in his data. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through the readings from the various instruments. "The patterns are impossible," he murmured to himself, comparing the brain activity graphs. During the surgery, Pachita's brainwaves had displayed frequencies never before documented in scientific literature, oscillations that exceeded 200 Hz at certain critical moments of the procedure. Even more intriguing were the data from the electromagnetic field sensors. Jacobo had positioned 3 sensors in a triangular pattern around the operating table, hoping to detect any anomalies in the environment. What he encountered defied all his expectations. "Elena," he called, his voice betraying a mix of excitement and bewilderment. "During the surgery, did you notice any change in the room's temperature?" The assistant, who was folding the used sheets, paused. "Yes, Professor. It always gets colder when Cuauhtémoc is present. It's as if an ancient breeze were blowing through time." The thermal sensors confirmed this subjective observation. At the precise moment Pachita began her incorporation, the temperature around the surgical table dropped by 7.3 degrees Celsius. Even more extraordinary, this temperature drop formed a precise geometric pattern, a toroidal field reminiscent of ancient descriptions of the energy body mentioned in mystical texts. In his notebook, Jacobo began sketching what would become the first draft of the lattice theory. His fingers moved swiftly across the paper, drawing complex diagrams that attempted to map the interaction between consciousness and physical reality. Consciousness is not localized. It is a field that permeates all of space-time. What we observe as physical reality is merely a focal manifestation of this universal field. During altered states of consciousness, such as Pachita, Cuauhtémoc's trance, the operator is able to directly access and manipulate this underlying field. He paused in his notes, recalling a crucial detail from the surgery. At the moment the damaged nerves began to regenerate, his sensors had detected a quantum interference pattern resembling particle entanglement. "And what if," he wrote, his handwriting growing more urgent, "the reality we perceive is merely a three-dimensional projection of a far more complex informational field, a cosmic neural lattice where every point is connected to all others, transcending the limitations of linear space-time?" Pachita, who had returned to her usual calm demeanor and was silently observing Jacobo, approached with a cup of herbal tea. "What you witnessed today," she said softly, "is something the ancient shamans have always known. They called it Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror that reflects all possible realities." As he drove home that night, Jacobo's mind buzzed with possibilities. The traffic of Mexico City, normally a source of frustration, barely registered in his consciousness as he mentally replayed the evening's events. Back in his apartment, he spread all the collected data across his work desk. EEG charts, electromagnetic field readings, temperature logs, all forming a mosaic of evidence that defied conventional science. The high-speed camera had captured something particularly intriguing. During the surgery, tiny points of light invisible to the naked eye had danced around Pachita's hands. "Dr. Grinberg?" The voice of Maria, his assistant, snapped him back to the present. It was the next morning, and he hadn't even realized he'd spent the entire night working. "The department head wants to see you. It seems urgent." Dr. Ramirez's office was a monument to traditional academia. Diplomas and certificates adorned the walls, and a heavy mahogany desk dominated the space. The director, a man in his 60s with impeccably groomed silver hair, peered at Jacobo over his reading glasses. "Jacobo," he began, his voice a blend of concern and authority, "it has come to my attention that you are conducting unconventional research." "Professor Ramirez," Jacobo replied, keeping his voice steady despite the mounting tension. "The data I collected last night is extraordinary. The brainwave patterns during the trance state show frequencies never before documented, and the fluctuations in the electromagnetic field—" "Jacobo," Ramirez interrupted, raising a hand. "You are one of our most brilliant researchers. Your contributions to the field of neuroscience are undeniable, but faith healers, psychic surgeries, this could jeopardize the entire credibility of the department." Back in his lab, Jacobo found Maria analyzing the data from the previous night. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of fascination and disbelief. "Professor," she said, pointing to a particular sequence of readings, "during the surgery, Pachita's and the patient's brainwave patterns achieved perfect synchronization. It's as if their consciousnesses had momentarily merged," Jacobo finished. "And look at this." He opened his notebook to a complex diagram he had sketched in the early hours of the morning. "I'm calling this the neuronal lattice, a matrix of consciousness that connects all living beings." Maria studied the diagram intently. "This resembles some concepts from quantum physics," she noted. "Quantum entanglement, non-locality." "Exactly," Jacobo grew animated. "What if consciousness isn't a product of the brain, but a fundamental feature of the universe? The brain would merely be a receiver, tuning our individual experience from this universal field of consciousness." At that moment, Dr. Eduardo Sanz, from the quantum physics department, entered the lab. He was a tall, lean man, known for his unyielding skepticism but also for his brilliant mind. "Grinberg," he said, holding a copy of the preliminary data Jacobo had shared, "what you've recorded? It's impossible. It practically violates every known law of physics." "Impossible," Jacobo smiled, "or just inexplicable within our current paradigm. Eduardo, you more than anyone should know that quantum physics has already shattered our classical notion of reality." In the days that followed, Jacobo delved even deeper into his research. His laboratory transformed into a nexus where cutting-edge science and ancient wisdom converged. On the walls, amidst EEG graphs and quantum field diagrams, he had hung reproductions of ancient Aztec codices that described altered states of consciousness. "Look at this," he explained to Maria, pointing to a series of equations covering his whiteboard. "The lattice theory suggests that consciousness operates in at least 7 dimensions. The 3 spatial dimensions we perceive are merely a projection of a far more complex structure." Maria, who had become his primary collaborator, studied the equations intently. "The interference patterns we detected during Pachita's surgeries, do they seem to indicate some kind of fold in space-time?" "Exactly." Jacobo picked up a 3-dimensional model he had constructed using colored wires and beads. "Imagine reality as this network. Each point is connected to all the others, not just the ones closest to it. In normal states of consciousness, we only perceive the local connections, but in altered states like Pachita's trance, a sudden sound interrupted his explanation. Standing at the laboratory door was Dr. Helena Torres, a visiting researcher from the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. "Dr. Grinberg," she said, her eyes gleaming with interest, "I read your preliminary paper on non-local consciousness fields. There are some striking similarities to the work we are developing at Princeton." Helena stepped into the lab, her experienced gaze taking in the equipment and diagrams. "Our group is studying what we call global consciousness fields. We've been detecting inexplicable coherence patterns in random number generators during collective consciousness events." Jacobo felt his heart quicken. Finally, someone from the scientific mainstream who didn't immediately dismiss her ideas. "Dr. Torres, let me show you the data we've collected during the psychic surgeries." But before he could continue, he noticed a suspicious movement through the laboratory window. A man in a dark suit was photographing the building from across the street. When he realized he'd been spotted, he quickly vanished among the parked cars. "Did you notice we're being watched?" Maria asked in a low voice after Helena had left. "It's not the first time this week." Jacobo nodded gravely. Ever since he began documenting Pachita's surgeries, strange occurrences had multiplied. Files disappeared from his computer, phone calls were mysteriously cut short, and now, explicit surveillance. That night, as he reviewed his notes at home, Jacobo received an unexpected call from Pachita. "They're getting nervous, Professor," she said, her voice heavy with concern. "The knowledge you are uncovering, some would prefer it to remain hidden." "But why?" Jacob asked, frustration evident in his voice. "If we can scientifically prove the existence of this consciousness matrix, imagine the implications for humanity." "Precisely because of that," Pachita replied. "You are close to something far greater than you can imagine. The lattice is not just a theory about consciousness. It is a map to access levels of reality that some consider dangerous." The next day, Jacob arrived early at the lab only to find it completely ransacked. Expensive equipment had been left untouched, but all his recent notes on the lattice theory had vanished. On the whiteboard, where complex equations once stood, someone had written in large letters, "Some doors must remain closed." "Professor," Maria burst into the lab, her face pale with worry. "The backups. All our digital files have been corrupted." But Jacob smiled serenely. "Do not worry, Maria. I was expecting something like this." He pulled a small flash drive from his pocket. "The real notes are here, and physical copies are in secure locations. Besides," he tapped his temple, "the most important things are stored right here." That afternoon, during another session with Pachita, Jacob implemented a series of even more sophisticated experiments. This time, in addition to the usual sensors, he had brought an experimental device developed in collaboration with Helena Torres, a quantum fluctuation detector, capable of measuring disturbances in the very fabric of space-time. "What you call reality," Pachita Cuauhtemoc said during the session, "is merely the surface of a much deeper ocean. The lattice you study, Professor, is the very structure of that ocean." During the surgery, this time on a patient with an inoperable brain tumor, the instruments recorded something extraordinary. At the exact moment Pachita began the procedure, the quantum fluctuation detector displayed patterns that, according to the known laws of physics, were impossible. "It's as if she's opening a portal," murmured Helena, who had secretly traveled to Mexico to witness the procedure. "The patterns are similar to those that would theoretically exist in an Einstein-Rosen bridge." Jacob watched mesmerized as Pachita worked. Her hands seemed to move through invisible dimensions, manipulating reality at its most fundamental level. The tumor literally vanished beneath her touch, not through physical removal, but through a reconfiguration of the very fabric of reality itself. "Consciousness," Cuauhtemoc explained through Pachita, "is not a product of the universe. The universe is a product of consciousness. What you call the lattice is the interface between mind and matter, the fabric from which reality is woven." Later, analyzing the data in a secure location, a small apartment he had rented under a false name, Jacob began to grasp the true implications of his discoveries. The lattice theory wasn't just a scientific model, it was a map to human capabilities previously thought impossible. "Look at these patterns," he showed Helena and Maria. During the surgery, Pachita wasn't just healing the patient, she was locally rewriting the laws of physics. If this can be understood and replicated, it would be the greatest leap in human history, Helena finished, or its greatest threat, depending on who controls this knowledge. A sudden noise in the hallway made them all freeze. Heavy footsteps were approaching. Quickly, Jacob gathered the documents into a folder prepared for emergencies. "They're getting closer," Maria whispered, her eyes nervously darting toward the door. "It doesn't matter," Jacob replied with a surprising calm. "Knowledge cannot be contained. If something happens to me, you know what to do." In the weeks leading up to his disappearance, Jacob worked tirelessly, as if he knew his time was running out. His final experiments with Pachita had revealed something even more extraordinary than all the previous discoveries. "The lattice is not just a network of information," he explained to Maria during a particularly productive night. "It is a field of infinite possibilities. Every point contains all possible realities, like a universal hologram." In his personal notebook, he had begun writing in a code that only Maria and Helena understood, a blend of mathematical symbols and references to ancient Aztec texts. Consciousness does not merely observe reality, it selects it from infinite possibilities. What Pachita does during her surgeries is navigate these possibilities, selecting a reality where healing has already occurred. It is not magic, nor is it a miracle. It is science at its most fundamental level. The final meeting with Pachita was unlike any before. She received him without her usual healing tools, her face marked by a grave expression. "They are coming, Professor," she said, her voice a mix of concern and resignation. "The knowledge you have uncovered, it is too powerful for some. But remember, the lattice cannot be destroyed, only temporarily concealed." That night, Pachita shared with Jacobo ancestral knowledge that had never before been revealed to a Western scientist. She spoke of dimensional portals known to the ancient Aztec priests, of states of consciousness that allowed one to transcend linear space-time, and of reality manipulation techniques that had been kept secret for millennia. "What you have rediscovered through science," she explained, "the ancients knew through direct experience. The lattice you have mapped with your instruments is what they called Tlaltecpactli, the realm where all realities converge." In the days that followed, Jacobo implemented a meticulous plan to preserve his discoveries. He divided his notes into parts, distributing them among trusted collaborators in different countries. He created a complex system of encoded files that would only make sense when assembled in a specific sequence. On his final day in the laboratory, he left enigmatic instructions for Maria. "When the full moon meets Venus on the horizon, seek where the jaguar sleeps. The numbers are the key, but only the heart knows the sequence." On the morning of March 12, 1994, Jacobo left home as he would on any other day. He carried his usual briefcase and appeared calm, almost serene. A security camera captured him entering his car, a blue Volkswagen that would later be found empty in the university parking lot. In his office, the final page of his journal contained only one sentence: "Reality is not what it seems. The truth is more extraordinary than any of us ever imagined." Beside it, a set of seemingly incomplete equations, which years later would be recognized as strikingly similar to the most advanced theories on quantum consciousness and multiverses. Maria was the first to notice something unusual. Jacobo never showed up for his scheduled lecture. His phone was turned off. In the laboratory, all the equipment had been meticulously cleaned and organized, something he never did. The first 48 hours following Jacobo's disappearance were a whirlwind of bewildering events. The police found his car in the university parking lot, perfectly parked with the keys still in the ignition. Inside, his work folder contained nothing but blank sheets of paper, dozens of them, as if someone had replaced all his documents. "It's impossible," Maria insisted to the investigators. "I saw him working on those documents just last night. There were pages and pages of equations, diagrams, notes. Helena Torres, who had flown to Mexico immediately upon hearing of the disappearance, discovered something intriguing in the lab. The most sensitive equipment, the kind used to measure quantum anomalies during Pachita's surgeries, was recording inexplicable patterns. "Look at this," she showed Maria and the other researchers. "The quantum fluctuation detectors are displaying the same patterns we observed during the psychic surgeries. But now they're appearing spontaneously, without any external intervention." When approached, Pachita offered only an enigmatic smile. "Jacobo hasn't disappeared," she said. "He has transcended. There are doors within the lattice that, once opened, cannot be closed." Within the scientific community, reactions to the disappearance were mixed. Many saw the event as an opportunity to completely discredit Jacobo's work. Dr. Ramirez, the department chair, swiftly issued a statement distancing the university from the unscientific speculations of its former researcher. Others, however, began to scrutinize his theories more closely. A group of theoretical physicists from Princeton University discovered that Jacobo's final equations, seemingly incomplete, bore striking similarities to advanced mathematical models of quantum consciousness. Maria and Helena continued their work in silence. The enigmatic instructions left by Jacobo began to make sense when they realized that the numbers mentioned were not coordinates or formulas, but dates. "When the full moon meets Venus on the horizon," Maria would often repeat. On a specific night following this clue, they found a box buried at the spot where Jacobo used to meditate, a high point on the outskirts of Mexico City, locally known as the Jaguar's Den. The box contained a digital storage device that was extraordinarily advanced for its time, protected by an encryption system that would only be fully deciphered years later. Inside, along with all of Jacobo's meticulously documented research, was a message. "If you are reading this, it means you have managed to follow the clues. What I have discovered about the lattice is only the beginning. Consciousness is not a product of the universe, it is its fundamental matrix. Every human mind is a node within this infinite network, capable of accessing and influencing the very fabric of reality. The ancients understood this. Pachita and others like her are guardians of a knowledge that humanity is not yet fully prepared to comprehend. But times are shifting. The lattice is becoming more visible to those who know where to look. My disappearance was necessary. Some truths are dangerous not because they are false, but because they are too true. Continue the work. The truth cannot be suppressed forever." In the years following Jacobo's disappearance, his theories began to find unexpected validation across various scientific fields. Quantum physics, in particular, advanced in directions that seemed to confirm crucial aspects of the lattice theory. In 2008, a team of researchers from the Max Planck Institute published a groundbreaking paper on large-scale quantum entanglement. The correlation patterns they discovered bore a striking resemblance to those Jacobo had described in his final notes. "It's as if he saw the future of physics," remarked Dr. Werner Schmidt, the lead researcher. "His models of the lattice anticipated discoveries that we are only now beginning to grasp with our most advanced technology." Maria, now a tenured professor at UNAM, continued to develop specific aspects of the theory. Her work on non-local fields of consciousness garnered international attention, particularly after a series of successful experiments with experienced meditators. What Jacobo discovered, she explained during a 2015 conference, was not merely a theory about consciousness, but a new paradigm for understanding the very nature of reality. The traditional distinction between observer and observed, between mind and matter, must be completely rethought. Helena Torres, at Princeton, focused on the mathematical implications of lattice theory. Her refined equations on the multidimensional geometry of consciousness began to find unexpected practical applications in fields such as quantum computing and neurotechnology. In 2019, a group of independent researchers managed to partially replicate some of the phenomena observed during Pachita's surgeries. Using a combination of precisely modulated magnetic fields and altered states of consciousness induced by deep meditation, They documented cases of healing that seemed impossible according to conventional medical paradigms. Even more intriguing were the discoveries in the field of transpersonal psychology. Therapists working with non-ordinary states of consciousness began reporting patterns of experience that aligned perfectly with Jacobo's descriptions of the lattice's structure. Patients often describe sensations of universal interconnectedness, of accessing an infinite field of information, reported Dr. Isabella Ramirez from the San Francisco Institute of Consciousness Studies. It's as if, in certain states, they can directly perceive the matrix of reality that Jacobo theorized. Jacobo's legacy also extended into the field of anthropology. Researchers studying shamanic traditions around the world began to notice consistent patterns that seemed to validate aspects of his theory. Descriptions by traditional healers about the nature of reality and consciousness, though expressed in mythological language, showed a striking resonance with the mathematical models of lattice theory. In 2022, an unexpected development shed new light on the mystery of his disappearance. A group of activist hackers released classified documents suggesting the existence of a secret government program dedicated to the study and suppression of research into consciousness anomalies. Jacobo's name appeared repeatedly in these documents, alongside other researchers who had either vanished or abruptly abandoned their work. By 2024, 30 years after Jacobo's disappearance, his ideas had become more relevant than ever. The rise of advanced quantum computing and new discoveries about the fundamental nature of space-time seemed to validate crucial aspects of the lattice theory, which had once been dismissed as purely speculative. Jacobo's work was prophetic, stated Dr. Quantum Lee of the Beijing Institute of Advanced Technology. His understanding of consciousness as a fundamental quantum phenomenon anticipated discoveries that we are only now beginning to make with our most advanced quantum computers. A new generation of researchers, inspired by his legacy, is taking his ideas even further. At the Center for Consciousness Studies in Bangalore, India, a multidisciplinary team is developing brain-machine interfaces based on the principles of the lattice. We are not merely measuring or interpreting brain activity, explained Dr. Amrita Patel, the project lead. We are beginning to understand how consciousness interacts with the very fabric of reality. The implications are revolutionary. In a particularly intriguing development, Maria and Helena, now in the twilight of their careers, finally published a comprehensive analysis of Jacobo's final experiments. Using quantum data processing technology, they managed to decode patterns in the original records that had remained hidden for decades. The data reveals something extraordinary, Maria discloses. During Pachita's surgeries, Jacobo wasn't merely documenting inexplicable healings. He was recording evidence of direct manipulation of the fabric of reality at a quantum level. The mystery of his disappearance continues to fuel debates and theories. Some, like Dr. James Morrison from the University of Edinburgh, suggest that Jacobo may have uncovered something so fundamental about the nature of reality that his disappearance was, in fact, a conscious transcendence to another level of existence. The final equations in his journal, Morrison argues, appear to describe a mathematical method for consciously navigating through different states of the lattice. If he managed to implement this in practice, Pachita passed away in 2017, taking many secrets with her. But in her last interview, given to an independent documentarian, she left an enigmatic statement. Jacobo is not lost. He is exactly where he chose to be. When humanity is ready, when science and ancient wisdom finally reconcile, you will understand that he never truly left. The legacy of Jacobo Grinberg transcends the mystery of his disappearance. His ideas about the nature of consciousness and reality continue to inspire scientists, philosophers, and seekers worldwide. The lattice theory, far from being refuted by time, seems increasingly relevant in an era where the boundaries between mind and matter, between observer and observed, grow ever more tenuous. As he wrote in his last known notes, "Reality is not what it appears to be. The truth is more extraordinary than any of us ever imagined. And perhaps, in the end, this is the greatest discovery of all, that the boundaries we believe to be absolute are merely the limits of our own perception. The mystery of Jacobo Grinberg stands as a provocative reminder that there is still much to be uncovered about the nature of consciousness and reality. His work continues to challenge our most fundamental assumptions about what is possible and what is real. And perhaps, as Pachita suggested, this is precisely the point, that some truths can only be grasped when we are ready to transcend our own limiting paradigms. Jacobo's true legacy lies not in the answers he provided, but in the questions he inspired us to ask, the end